metal safety deposit box, cold to the touch, heavy, locked for years. Inside the box lies a book, and beside it, an envelope. The envelope is sealed, and on it, 7 simple words written in careful script. Do not open until after Ethel's death. A woman stands in the bank vault, staring at these objects. She's been waiting. Ethel has passed, and now the waiting is over. The letter can be opened. The book can be examined. But as she lifts the book from the box, as she feels its weight in her hands, she wonders something that countless others will wonder after her. Does this book contain knowledge that could change the world? Or has its meaning already died, lost somewhere in the centuries between when it was written and now? The book itself is unremarkable at first glance, bound in soft vellum, yellowed with age, not particularly large, not decorated with gold or jewels, just old, very old. But when you open it, when you look at the pages, everything changes. The text is written in a script that resembles no known language. The letters, if they are letters, flow across the page in neat lines, organized into what look like paragraphs. They have the structure of words, the rhythm of sentences, but no one can read them. No one has ever read them, not in 600 years. And the illustrations. Strange doesn't begin to cover it. Plants that seem familiar at first, until you look closer and realize the leaves are wrong, the roots twist in impossible ways. The flowers belong to no species anyone has catalogued. Women, dozens of them, naked and small, floating in pools of green liquid, connected by tubes that snake across the pages like veins in a body. Star charts that map a sky no astronomer recognizes, circular diagrams within diagrams, wheels rotating within wheels, meaning something, surely meaning something, but what? For 6 centuries, this book has existed. For 6 centuries, it has been examined, studied, obsessed over. Scholars have dedicated their entire lives to it. Cryptographers who broke military codes during wars have failed to crack it. Linguists who speak a dozen languages find themselves helpless before its pages. Computer scientists have fed it into algorithms designed to find patterns in chaos. And still, the book remains silent. Some have called it the most mysterious manuscript in the world. Others have called it an elaborate hoax, though that raises its own questions. Why would someone in the 1500s create something this complex as a joke? Who were they trying to fool? And how did they know enough about language structure to make it look real? The book waits. It has always waited, locked in a safety deposit box, kept in private collections, hidden in monastery libraries, and now, available for anyone to see, high-resolution scans online, every page photographed and uploaded. Thousands of people can examine it at any time. But seeing it and understanding it are very different things. If knowledge can survive centuries, can meaning die? Can information exist without anyone to interpret it? This book suggests the answer might be yes, that you can hold knowledge in your hands and be completely powerless to access it. That meaning can be present and absent at the same time. The book has a name now. We call it the Voynich Manuscript, after a man who found it in 1912. But it had no name for most of its existence. It was just a book, a strange book, a book no one could read. And maybe that's the most unsettling part. Not that it exists, but that it waits. Patient, silent, keeping its secrets. The manuscript lives now at Yale University, in a building called the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. It's kept under lock and key, stored in climate-controlled conditions designed to preserve it for future generations. Only qualified researchers are allowed to examine the physical book directly, and even then, access is restricted. The pages are fragile. 600 years of existence have made them delicate, prone to damage from too much handling, from oils on human skin, from exposure to light. But Yale did something remarkable. They photographed every page, high-resolution scans, detailed enough that you can see the texture of the vellum, the way the ink has faded in some places and remained vivid in others. These scans are available online, free for anyone to view. You can sit at your computer and flip through the same pages that have frustrated scholars for centuries. You can zoom in on individual letters, examine the illustrations in detail, stare at the text until your eyes hurt trying to find patterns. This is both a gift and a curse. Access democratizes the mystery. Anyone can try to solve it now, not just academics with institutional backing. But it also means thousands of amateur cryptographers have convinced themselves they've cracked it, published their theories online, claimed to have finally solved what no one else could. None of them have. Not really. Because if someone had genuinely decoded the manuscript, if they'd found the key that unlocks its meaning, we'd know. The academic world would verify it. Other researchers would replicate their methods. The mystery would be over. But the mystery continues. The manuscript sits in its climate-controlled storage at Yale, and the scans circulate online, and people keep trying. They keep failing. They keep trying again. The woman who opened the safety deposit box, the one who found the book and the letter, she wasn't the first person to be haunted by this manuscript. She was just one in a long chain of obsessed individuals, each convinced they might be the one to finally understand what they were looking at. The manuscript has that effect on people. It draws you in. It makes you think that if you just look at it long enough, if you approach it from the right angle, if you know the right things about medieval history or cryptography or linguistics, you'll see what everyone else has missed. And maybe someone will. Maybe the person who finally decodes it is reading this right now, or will read it tomorrow, or 10 years from now. Maybe the key is sitting in some archive, waiting to be discovered. Or maybe the key died with the person who wrote this book, lost 600 years ago. Either way, the manuscript waits. It's very good at waiting. The story most people know begins in 1912, with a man named Wilfred Voynich. He was a Polish book dealer, an expert in rare manuscripts, someone who made his living finding valuable old texts and selling them to collectors and institutions. He had good instincts for this work, an eye for recognizing when something was genuinely rare versus just old. In 1912, he traveled to Italy, to a place called the Villa Mondragone. It's a beautiful old building, a former Jesuit retreat near Rome, sitting on a hill with views of the surrounding countryside. The Jesuits who owned it were facing financial difficulties. Maintaining an old villa is expensive, and they needed money. So they decided to sell some of their manuscripts, items from their collection that might bring in enough to pay for repairs and upkeep. Voynich arrived at the villa with cash and expertise. He knew what he was looking for, the kind of manuscripts that would be valuable, that he could resell at a profit. The Jesuits showed him their collection, and he ended up purchasing around 30 manuscripts. Not a bad haul. Most of them were exactly what he expected, rare but understandable texts, the kind of thing that would interest collectors. And then there was the other book, the one that didn't make sense. Voynich was an experienced book dealer. He'd seen thousands of manuscripts in his career. He could identify languages, date texts based on handwriting styles, estimate value based on rarity and condition. But this book made him stop. He looked at the script and recognized nothing. He looked at the illustrations and saw plants. He couldn't identify astronomical diagrams that didn't match any tradition he knew. This wasn't normal. This was something else entirely. He realized immediately that he had two options. He could set the book aside as curiosity, something strange but probably not valuable because no one could read it. Or he could take a risk. He could buy it, study it, show it to experts, see if anyone could figure out what it was. Voynich chose the risk. He purchased the manuscript along with the others and took it back to his shop in London. And then he did something that would define the rest of his life. He became obsessed with it. He started showing it to people. Scholars who specialized in medieval languages, cryptographers who had experience with codes and ciphers, linguists who might recognize linguistic structures he'd missed. He sent copies to universities. He displayed the manuscript at exhibitions. He talked about it to anyone who would listen. His message was always the same. Look at this. Help me. Understand what this is. Someone must recognize this. Language must be able to identify these plants, must know what this manuscript contains. People tried, genuinely tried. They examined the text, analyzed the illustrations, compared it to everything they knew. Some thought it might be an unknown form of Latin. Others suggested it could be Arabic written in a strange script. A few wondered if it was an artificial language, something invented by its author. None of the theories held up under scrutiny. Every proposed solution would work for a few words or a few pages, then fall apart when applied to the rest of the manuscript. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. Voynich didn't give up. For 18 years, from 1912 until his death in 1930, he promoted the manuscript, searched for answers, hoped that someone would finally crack it. He was convinced that the answer was out there, that the right person with the right knowledge would see something everyone else had missed. He died without that answer. The manuscript, the book that had consumed so much of his time and energy and hope, remained as mysterious as the day he found it. 18 years of work, thousands of hours spent studying it, showing it to experts, corresponding with scholars around the world. And in the end, he understood it no better than when he first saw it at the Villa Mondragone. The obsession he felt, that need to know what the manuscript said, it didn't die with him. It just transferred to someone else. After Wilfrid Voynich died in 1930, the manuscript passed to his wife, Ethel Lillian Voynich. She was an interesting person in her own right, a novelist and musician, someone who'd lived through revolution and exile and the strange adventure of being married to a rare book dealer obsessed with an undecipherable text. But Ethel didn't share her husband's passion for the manuscript. She'd watched him spend 18 years trying to solve it. She'd seen the frustration, the hope, that never quite materialized into answers. Maybe she was tired of it. Maybe she simply had other priorities. Whatever the reason, she didn't continue his campaign to decode it. Instead, she tried to sell it. Her husband had believed the manuscript was immensely valuable, potentially worth over $1 million in today's money. Surely someone would pay for such a unique artifact, such an intriguing mystery. But no one did. Collectors wanted things they could understand, texts they could read, manuscripts with clear historical value. A book no one could decipher had limited appeal, no matter how mysterious it was. Years passed. The manuscript didn't sell. And eventually, Ethel made a decision that would become part of the manuscript's legend. She locked it in a safety deposit box in a bank vault. She placed it there along with a sealed envelope, and on that envelope she wrote 7 words. Do not open until after Ethel's death. Inside the envelope was a letter addressed to a woman named Anna Nill. Instructions for what to do with the manuscript after Ethel was gone. Anne Nill was important to this story in ways that are easy to overlook. She'd been Wilfrid Voynich's secretary for years, helping him run his book business, assisting with acquisitions and sales. After Wilfrid died, she stayed on to help Ethel manage the business. More than that, she became Ethel's companion, living with her as the widow grew older. The relationship between Ethel and Anne raises questions the historical record doesn't fully answer. Were they simply close friends? Was Anne just a loyal employee who stayed to help? Or was there something more there, something that couldn't be spoken openly in that era? We don't know. What we do know is that Ethel trusted Anne completely, trusted her enough to make her the one who would decide the manuscript's fate. Ethel died in 1960. The safety deposit box was opened. Anne read the letter, saw the instructions, and set about trying to sell the manuscript. She succeeded where Ethel had failed, finding a buyer in 1961, a man named Hans P. Krauss, a rare book dealer like Wilfrid had been, someone who specialized in valuable texts. Hans bought the manuscript for $24,500, which would be about $260,000 today. Not the fortune Wilfrid had hoped for, but substantial. Hans thought he could do better. He believed he could sell it for much more. perhaps as much as 1.4 million in today's money. He tried for 8 years. 8 years of attempting to find a buyer, someone who would pay what he thought the manuscript was worth. And he failed. In 1969, frustrated and unable to sell it, he donated it to Yale University. At least there it would be preserved, studied, kept safe for future generations. The manuscript's journey from owner to owner is fascinating because it shows a pattern. Each person who possesses it becomes convinced they can unlock its secrets or profit from its mystery. Each person eventually admits defeat, and the manuscript moves on, unchanged, still unread, still waiting. But the story doesn't start with Voynich finding it at the Villa Mondragone. The book existed long before 1912. To understand it, we need to trace it backward through time, following its path from owner to owner until the trail goes cold. When Voynich purchased the manuscript from the Jesuits at the Villa Mondragone, it came with something extra. A letter, old and carefully preserved, that had been kept with the book. This letter would become one of the few clues to the manuscript's earlier history. The letter was addressed to a man named Athanasius Kircher. If you know anything about 17th century scholarship, that name should sound familiar. Kircher was a Jesuit scholar, an expert in languages, a man who studied everything from Egyptian hieroglyphs to Chinese characters. He was known for attempting to decode ancient scripts, even though many of his attempts were ultimately unsuccessful. He was exactly the kind of person you'd send a mysterious manuscript to if you wanted help deciphering it. The letter dates to around 1666. It describes the manuscript and asks for Kircher's help in understanding it. Whoever wrote that letter was already frustrated by the book's incomprehensibility, already desperate for answers. Kircher received the manuscript, examined it, and like everyone who would come after him, failed to decode it. But unlike later owners, he didn't spend decades obsessing over it. It simply became another item in his vast collection at the Collegio Romano, now known as the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. Just one more curiosity among thousands. The manuscript sat there for 200 years. 2 centuries of gathering dust in a library, occasionally examined by curious scholars, never decoded, never understood. It existed in obscurity, known to a few people, but largely forgotten. Then, in 1870, everything changed. Italy was being unified, transformed from a collection of separate kingdoms and papal territories into a single nation. The new government was secular, suspicious of church power, and they started seizing church properties. Libraries were particularly vulnerable. The Jesuits realized their collection was at risk. They moved quickly, quietly. Books were transferred from the Collegio Romano to private collections, to villas owned by faculty members, anywhere the government might not look. The goal was preservation, keeping valuable manuscripts out of government hands until the political situation stabilized. The Voynich Manuscript was among the books that were moved. It was transferred to the Villa Mondragone in Frascati, home to a Jesuit college. There it sat for another 40 years, hidden away, safe from seizure, but largely forgotten. Until Voynich arrived in 1912, looking to buy manuscripts, and pulled it back into the light. But that letter, the one addressed to Kircher, contained more information. It mentioned 2 earlier owners. The person who wrote to Kircher was a man named Johannes Marcus Marci, a physician and scholar, head of Charles University in Prague. He explained in his letter that he'd acquired the manuscript from a friend who had recently died, an alchemist named Georg Barisch. Barisch is interesting because he might be the first owner we know of who truly obsessed over the manuscript. He spent years trying to decode it, convinced it held valuable hidden knowledge. Maybe alchemical secrets, maybe medical information, maybe something that would make him famous if he could just unlock it. He failed, of course, but before he died, he sent a letter to Kircher, along with a copy of part of the manuscript, asking for help. Kircher apparently couldn't help him either. After Barisch died in the 1630s, Marci inherited the manuscript, and Marci, knowing Kircher's reputation, tried again. He sent the actual manuscript this time, along with his own letter explaining its history as he knew it. So Beresh is the first confirmed owner we can identify. But he clearly wasn't the author. The manuscript was already old when he got it, already mysterious, already undecipherable. Who owned it before Beresh? That's where things get complicated. Recent analysis, using multispectral imaging, a technique that reveals traces invisible to the naked eye, found something interesting on the first page of the manuscript. A signature, or rather the faint traces of a signature that had been erased. The name was Jacobus Horsicki de Tepanek. Try saying that 3 times fast. This man was the personal physician to Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, one of the most eccentric rulers in European history. Rudolph was obsessed with alchemy, astrology, the occult, anything that promised hidden knowledge or power. His court in Prague attracted scholars, alchemists, mystics, anyone claiming to have secret wisdom. The fact that de Tepanek's signature was on the manuscript suggests he owned it, probably in the early 1600s. And that connects directly to what the letter said about Rudolph II being a previous owner. The emperor likely gave the manuscript to his physician as a gift or as partial payment for services. But how did Rudolph get it? The letter claims he paid 600 ducats for it, an enormous sum. 600 gold coins for a single book would be extraordinary. That price suggests either the manuscript was thought to be incredibly valuable, or more likely that Rudolph bought a collection of books and the manuscript was among them. This is where a researcher named Stefan Guzzi did some fascinating work. He searched through old archives of the Holy Roman Empire, looking for transactions involving 600 ducats. He found one. In 1599, Rudolph II paid exactly 600 gold coins to a man named Karl Weidemann for a collection of books. Not one book, a collection, which makes more sense. The manuscript was probably part of that larger purchase, bundled in with other texts. Weidemann was likely its owner before the emperor bought it. Guzzi's research revealed another interesting connection. Weidemann was close friends with a man named Leonard Rauwolf, a famous German botanist, physician, and traveller. Rauwolf had written several beautifully illustrated books about plants, books that Rudolph had purchased a few years earlier. When Rauwolf died in 1596, his books and manuscripts were sold off. 3 years later, Wiedemann sold that collection to Rudolph. The timing works. The connection makes sense. And given that the Voynich Manuscript is full of botanical illustrations, the idea that it might have belonged to a famous botanist is compelling. Did Rauwolf own it? Did he create it? We don't know. The trail goes cold there. We can trace the manuscript back to around 1596 or 99, but before that, nothing. No records, no mentions in letters or inventories, just absence. There's one more potential author mentioned in that letter to Kircher. The letter claims that Rudolph II believed the manuscript had been written by Roger Bacon, a 13th century English philosopher and scientist. Bacon was a fascinating figure, an early advocate for the scientific method, someone who believed in observation and experimentation rather than just relying on ancient authorities. By the 1600s, Bacon's reputation had grown far beyond his actual accomplishments. People thought of him as an alchemist, a wizard, someone with secret knowledge. His name carried weight among those interested in the occult, so connecting the manuscript to Bacon would make it seem more valuable, more important. There's just one problem. We can now date the manuscript using radiocarbon analysis of the vellum. The parchment dates to between 1404 and 1438, possibly as wide a range as 1391 to 1483. Roger Bacon died in 1292. He couldn't have written it. The parchment didn't exist yet when he was alive. The manuscript was created at least 100 years after his death. So Rudolph was wrong, or whoever told him it was written by Bacon was lying, trying to increase its value by connecting it to a famous name. Either way, Bacon isn't the author, which means we still don't know who created this book. The trail of ownership goes back about 400 years. Before that, Silence. The manuscript existed, somewhere, owned by someone. But who? We may never know. Let's talk about the manuscript itself, the physical object. Because before we can discuss theories about its meaning, we need to understand what it actually is. The book is bound in limp vellum, a soft leather-like material made from calfskin. This was common for manuscripts in the medieval period. The binding measures about 23.5 centimeters in height, 16 centimeters in width, and 5 centimeters thick. Not particularly large. You could hold it comfortably in your hands, carry it in a bag. Inside are approximately 234 pages, though scholars believe several pages are missing. You can see where pages have been torn out or lost over the centuries. What we have is likely incomplete, which raises interesting questions. Were the missing pages torn out deliberately? Did they contain something someone wanted to hide or destroy? Or were they just lost to time, victims of 600 years of wear and damage? The pages are made of vellum, the same material as the cover. This was expensive in the medieval period. Vellum had to be carefully prepared, stretched and scraped and treated. A book this size would have required the skins of multiple calves. Whoever commissioned it or created it had resources. The ink is standard for the period, carbon-based, made from soot or charcoal mixed with a binding agent. It's held up remarkably well. On most pages the text is still clearly visible, still dark enough to read, if only we could understand what it said. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum has given us a creation date with reasonable certainty. Multiple pages were tested, and they all date to the early 1500s, specifically between 1404 and 1438. There's some variation between pages which makes sense. Vellum was sometimes stored for years before being used, so pages in the same book might come from animals that died decades apart. This dating is crucial because it eliminates many theories about authorship. It confirms the manuscript is genuinely old, not a modern forgery. It places creation in the early 15th century, a specific historical period with specific knowledge and technologies available. The manuscript is real. It's old. It's not a hoax created by Voynich or anyone in the modern era. Whatever it is, whatever it means, it was created 600 years ago by someone with access to expensive materials and enough motivation to fill over 200 pages with carefully written text and detailed illustrations. That's what makes this so fascinating. This isn't someone scribbling nonsense for a joke. This is a substantial project, something that would have taken months or years to complete. Time, materials, effort, all invested in creating something. But what? And for whom? The manuscript divides naturally into 6 sections, each with its own theme based on the illustrations. Walking through these sections is like touring a museum of impossible things. Each section raises its own questions, offers its own mysteries. The first and largest section is botanical. Over half the manuscript, more than 100 pages, filled with drawings of plants. At first glance they seem normal enough. Roots, stems, leaves, flowers. The kind of thing you'd expect in a medieval herbal, a book about plants and their medicinal uses. But look closer. The plants are wrong. Not entirely wrong. Not completely alien. Just wrong enough to be deeply unsettling. A flower that looks like it might be a violet, except the petals curve in ways violet petals don't curve. Leaves that resemble something you've seen before, except they're attached to the stem wrong, or they're the wrong shape at the base. Some plants seem to be composites, like someone took parts from different species and assembled them into something new. A root system from one plant, a stem from another, leaves from a third, flowers from a fourth. Botanical chimeras that exist nowhere in nature. Botanists have been trying to identify these plants for over a century. Some have claimed matches, arguing that a particular drawing represents a stylized version of a known species. A few researchers claimed the plants match flora from 16th century Central America, morning glory, prickly pear, things the author might have seen if they'd traveled to the New World. But none of these identifications are universally accepted. For every plant someone claims to identify, other experts disagree. The matches are never perfect. There's always something off about them. Maybe the plants are symbolic rather than literal. Maybe each drawing represents an idea or a concept in some system of medicine or alchemy. Maybe they're deliberately obscured, drawn badly on purpose to hide their true identity. Or maybe they're just imaginary, plants that exist only on these pages. The second section shifts to astronomy, and here things start to feel otherworldly. Pages filled with circular diagrams, wheels within wheels, zodiac symbols taking up entire folios. At first it looks like standard medieval astrology, the kind of thing you'd find in astronomical texts from that period. But then you notice the problems. The constellations don't match any known star charts. Not European, not Arabic, not Chinese. It's like the author was mapping a different sky or making up their own version of the heavens. There are 12 circular diagrams that seem to correspond to zodiac signs. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, all present. But the figures are strange. Sagittarius holds a crossbow instead of a bow and arrow. Small details are wrong. It's close enough to be recognizable, far enough off to be confusing. Some researchers think this might be based on Kabbalistic diagrams, the mystical Jewish tradition of interpreting hidden meanings in scripture. Others suggest Islamic star maps or Indian astronomical traditions. But none of these theories fully explain what we're seeing. It's all just close enough to be frustrating. The third section is perhaps the strangest. The biological section, though calling it biological might be generous. Pages and pages of naked women, small figures drawn in groups, bathing in what look like pools or tubs. The pools are connected by tubes, long winding passages that snake across the pages like plumbing or blood vessels. Some women are sitting in the pools. Others are standing. Some seem to be half submerged. The tubes sometimes sprout stars or strange root-like structures. It's all very anatomically confusing, very difficult to interpret with any certainty. What does this represent? Health rituals? Fertility rites? Some kind of hydrotherapy or bathing practice? The theory that makes the most sense to many scholars is that this relates to medieval ideas about medicine and the body, the concept of humours, the belief that health depended on balancing different fluids in the body. But that's just a guess. It could be metaphorical. It could be alchemical, representing transformation and purification. Some have suggested it's connected to gynecology, an early attempt to understand female anatomy and reproduction. Others think the tubes represent water circulation systems, early plumbing. Or it could be something else entirely, something we can't imagine because we don't have the cultural context to understand it. The fourth section is cosmological, filled with circular diagrams and abstract symbols. Some look like continuations of the astronomical section, star charts or celestial maps. Others resemble blueprints of cities or mechanical devices. Still others might be maps of the human body conceived as a cosmic system. One famous feature is the 9 rosette fold-out, a 6-page spread that unfolds to show 9 interconnected circles. Each circle is packed with stars, castles, intricate patterns. Some researchers think this might represent the universe according to some esoteric cosmology. Others argue it's alchemical, showing processes of transformation. A few think it might be spiritual or mystical, a guide to some understanding of reality that we've lost. The fifth section shows pharmaceutical content. Drawings of plant parts, roots being processed, jars of various sizes and shapes. Lots of jars. More jars than you'd think. 1. Manuscript could contain. These jars don't match anything from known medieval alchemy or apothecary practices. They're detailed, carefully drawn, but we have no idea what they're supposed to contain. Are these medicines? Elixirs? Potions of some kind? Or are the jars symbolic, representing concepts rather than actual containers? Without being able to read the text, we're just guessing based on pictures. The sixth and final section consists of what appear to be recipes, short paragraphs, each marked with a small star-like symbol. These could be alchemical formulas, potion instructions, medical remedies, or cooking recipes. They could be prayers or incantations. They could be completely unrelated to the images that came before. We don't know. We can see that the paragraphs are organized, that they follow some kind of structure, but we can't read them, so we're left staring at organized blocks of incomprehensible text, knowing they probably mean something, unable to access that meaning. These 6 sections, taken together, paint a picture of something, a system, a body of knowledge, a way of understanding the world. But what kind of knowledge? What kind of system? We can see the shape of it, the outline, but we can't grasp the substance. It's like looking at a building in thick fog. You can tell it's there, you can see parts of it, but you can't quite make out what it is. Now let's talk about the text itself, the script scholars call Voynich, because this is where things get truly strange from a linguistic perspective. The manuscript contains approximately 35,000 words written in an unknown script. The alphabet, if it is an alphabet, consists of about 20 to 30 distinct characters depending on how you count variations. The characters don't match any known writing system. They're not Latin, not Greek, not Arabic, not Hebrew. They're unique to this manuscript. But here's what's fascinating. The text isn't random. It has structure, real structure, the kind of statistical properties you see in natural languages. There's a principle in linguistics called Zipf's law. It describes how word frequency works in language. The most common word in any language, like the in English, appears about twice as often as the second most common word, 3 times as often as the third most common word, and so on, following a predictable mathematical distribution. This pattern shows up in virtually every natural language. It seems to be a fundamental property of how humans use words to communicate, and crucially, it doesn't show up in random text or in glossolalia, the kind of stream of consciousness pseudo-language people sometimes produce during religious ecstasy or certain mental states. The Voynich Manuscript follows Zipf's law. The word distribution matches what you'd expect from a real language. That's remarkable. That suggests either the text is genuinely meaningful, written in an unknown language, or it was created by someone who understood language structure well enough to fake it convincingly. Could someone in the 1500s have known about Zipf's law? No. The principle wasn't formalized until the 1930s and 40s, which means if this is a hoax, the hoaxer accidentally created fake text that happens to match a statistical property of language that wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years. That seems unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. The text also shows other properties consistent with real language. Words are broken into what appear to be syllables. There are patterns in how characters combine, some combinations appearing frequently, while others never appear at all. The kind of rules you'd expect in a language where certain sounds or letter combinations are permitted while others are forbidden. There are apparent prefixes and suffixes, words that share common beginnings or endings, suggesting some kind of grammatical system, the kind of structure you see in agglutinative languages, where meaning is built by stacking morphemes together. None of this proves the text is meaningful, but it strongly suggests it's not random gibberish scribbled by someone experiencing a mental health crisis. It has too much structure for that, too many patterns that match what we see in real languages. So if it's structured like language, why can't we read it? Why has no one been able to decode it despite 600 years of trying? That's the central mystery. The text looks like it should be solvable. It has all the properties we associate with decipherable writing, but every attempt to crack it has failed. Which brings us to one of the most persistent questions about the manuscript. Is it a hoax, an elaborate fake created to fool people? A researcher named Gordon Rugg spent over a decade investigating this possibility. He wanted to know if someone in the 1500s could have created text that looks meaningful without actually meaning anything. And he demonstrated that it's possible. Rugg developed a method using a table of syllables and a card with holes cut in it. You place the card over the table, and the syllables visible through the holes can be combined into words. Move the card, get new combinations. It's simple, mechanical, and it produces text that looks remarkably similar to Voynich. More importantly, text created this way follows Zipf's law. It has the statistical properties of natural language even though it means nothing. It's gibberish that successfully mimics meaningful text. Does this prove the manuscript is a hoax? Not necessarily. Rugg developed his method with knowledge of Zipf's law and with the benefit of having the manuscript to study. He knew what properties the fake text needed to have. Someone in the 1500s wouldn't have had that advantage. But it does prove that creating convincing fake text is possible. That someone could have done it without modern knowledge of linguistics, just through intuition about how language works and a clever mechanical system for generating words. However, there's a counter-argument. Two researchers, Marcela Montemuro and Damien Zanet, used information theory to analyze the manuscript in more depth than just checking Zipf's law. They found something interesting. In each of the 6 sections of the manuscript, there are words that appear commonly in that section, but rarely or never in other sections. Section-specific vocabulary, like you'd expect if different sections were discussing different topics. The botanical section has words that don't appear in the astronomical section. The pharmaceutical section has its own vocabulary. They also found words with similar structures appearing in related contexts. Words that
share endings or beginnings clustered together, like how in English we have psychology, biology, astrology, all ending in ology and all related to fields of study. This kind of semantic structure is hard to fake. It suggests intent. It suggests the text was created to convey specific meanings in specific contexts, not just to look vaguely language-like. If this is a hoax, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one. The hoaxer would have needed to understand language structure well enough to create not just convincing individual words, but convincing vocabulary distributions across different sections. They would have needed to maintain consistency across over 200 pages of text. They would have needed to invest months or years in a project that might never profit them. Is that possible? Yes. Is it likely? That's harder to say. Recent analysis added another wrinkle to the question of authorship. A scholar named Lisa Fagan Davis, one of the world's leading experts on the manuscript, used digital paleography tools to analyze the handwriting. Paleography is the study of historical handwriting, and experts can identify individual scribes based on subtle characteristics in how they form letters. Davis found evidence of 5 distinct handwriting styles in the manuscript, 5 different scribes, not one. And they didn't simply divide the work by section. Sometimes they switch in the middle of a page. Sometimes multiple hands appear on a single foldout. This finding has been reviewed and confirmed by other researchers. It's now widely accepted that the manuscript was created by multiple people working together. A community project, not an individual effort. This has profound implications. It suggests the manuscript wasn't created by a lone hoaxer or a single obsessed individual. It was a collaborative work, possibly created by a community of scholars or monks or specialists working together. That makes the hoax theory less likely. Hoaxes are usually solo projects. Getting 5 people to collaborate on an elaborate fake and maintain the deception for potentially years seems difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. It also suggests the manuscript might have served a real purpose within whatever community created it, that it was made for use, not just to deceive. One theory that's gained attention proposes the manuscript might be written in an ancient form of Turkish, not modern Turkish, but an older version from the broader Turkic language family. In 2018, a Turkish electrical engineer named Ahmet Ardik, working with his sons, noticed something interesting. The structure of Voynich matches patterns found in agglutinative languages. These are languages like Turkish, where words are built by stacking small, meaningful units together, like building with blocks. For example, in Turkish, ev means house, evler means houses, evlerde means in the houses, all built from the same root by adding prefixes and suffixes, Voynich. Words often look like they're built this way. Ardik suggested the text might be written phonetically, using symbols the author invented or adapted. He even published a translation of an entire page and claimed to have decoded over 600 words. The problem is verification. His method isn't easily replicable. Other researchers can't follow his steps and get the same results. It relies heavily on subjective interpretation, on making choices about how to divide words and which sounds to assign to symbols. Lisa Fagan-Davis, the Yale expert, acknowledges the theory has interesting elements, but emphasizes it needs rigorous verification before being accepted. That's the pattern with most Voynich theories. They start promising and then struggle under scrutiny. Another theory suggests Hebrew as the base language. In 2020, a German linguist named Rainer Hannig proposed the manuscript might be written in Hebrew using an invented alphabet. He analyzed word structures and found patterns matching Semitic languages, especially Hebrew. He even translated full phrases like, "The farmer groaned over the times," which sounds plausibly medieval. His theory is that this might be centuries-old Hebrew, possibly a local dialect, written in secret script to keep it private or sacred. Honig passed away in 2022, and no one has taken up his work in a systematic way. His translations, while intriguing, face the same problem as other attempts. They work for a few lines but become increasingly strained when applied more broadly. Both these theories assume the manuscript is a code or cipher, with letters or symbols corresponding to sounds or letters in another language. That's one of the oldest approaches to the manuscript. Maybe the weird script is just a substitution cipher. Maybe if we figure out which Voynich character corresponds to which letter in Latin or Hebrew or Turkish, the whole thing will become readable. But 600 years of trying that approach hasn't worked. Either the correspondence is more complex than a simple substitution, or the underlying assumption is wrong. The most notable historical attempt to crack the code came from William Friedman, a legend in cryptography. He helped lay the groundwork for breaking military codes during World War II. If anyone could crack the Voynich Manuscript, conventional wisdom said, it would be Friedman. In the 1940s, while leading what would become the National Security Agency, he formed a study group of military cryptanalysts. These were serious people with credentials in linguistics, paleography, mathematics, heavy hitters. They met after hours to work on the manuscript, treating it as a challenging puzzle. Their approach was systematic. They transcribed the text onto IBM punch cards, an early method of data storage, so they could run computer analysis looking for patterns. They processed at least 48,000 characters this way. But the project was voluntary, done after work. Hours, and eventually the group stopped meeting. They didn't find anything, no breakthrough, no decoded passages, just more confirmation that the manuscript was genuinely difficult. Friedman tried again in 1962 with a second study group and more advanced computers. They spent months creating graphs, flowcharts, analytical tools. But the company providing the computers eventually stopped allowing them for personal projects, and the group disbanded. Friedman concluded that the manuscript probably wasn't a cipher requiring a key to decode. He thought it was more likely a constructed language deliberately invented, and he admitted that breaking it would be extremely difficult, possibly impossible with the tools available to him. One wonders what Friedman could have accomplished with modern AI. With machine learning algorithms that can process massive amounts of data, find patterns humans miss, test thousands of hypotheses in seconds. In fact, AI has been used several times to analyze the manuscript. Some projects thought they found names or repeating structures. A more recent attempt in 2025 focused on whether the symbols might follow visual logic rather than corresponding to sounds. None have solved it. They've just added more theories to an already crowded field. The most publicized AI attempt came in 2018 from researchers at the University of Alberta. They ran the manuscript through an algorithm trained on 380 different languages. The AI suggested the text might be anagrams where letters are scrambled, making it even harder to decode. When the AI tried unscrambling words and matching them to Hebrew, it produced a first sentence. She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people. Critics weren't convinced. The translation required too much interpretation, too many subjective choices about which letters to move and which vowels to add. The method wasn't rigorous enough, without consistent, logical rules. You could twist almost any text into almost any meaning. Still, the AI work wasn't useless. It reinforced that Voynich has patterns consistent with real language, that it's structured in ways random text isn't. It's a good first step, but more work is needed. While we haven't decoded the text, we do have theories about what the manuscript's content might be, and some are more grounded than others. The wildest speculation suggests the manuscript isn't from our world. Maybe it's from another dimension, which would explain why the plants look familiar but wrong. Maybe it's a message from another planet, alien language and alien botany, which would explain the women in strange vats and the star charts that don't match our sky. The curator at Yale once joked to a BBC journalist that his favorite theory is that it's the illustrated diary of a teenage space alien left behind on Earth. It's funny because it's so far-fetched, but it's also telling that even experts feel the need to joke about how impossible the manuscript seems. There's no evidence for any of this, of course, but the theories persist because the manuscript resists conventional explanation. A more scholarly approach suggests the manuscript might be an alchemical herbal, not a practical field guide to plants, but a mystical recipe book where plants represent ideas and concepts rather than literal species. Medieval alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold. It was a complex system of symbolism, planetary correspondences, and transformation metaphors. Alchemical herbals used plant imagery to encode knowledge about chemical processes, medical treatments, spiritual development. Researcher Deanne O'Donovan argues the manuscript shares characteristics with known alchemical herbals from 15th century Italy. She points to similarities with a text called the Tractatus de Herbis, noting that both manuscripts feature around 90 to 100 full-page plant images, matching the conventions of late medieval alchemical herbals. The botanical section might not show real plants, but symbolic ones, where the twisted roots and strange flowers represent alchemical processes or ingredients. The bathing women might illustrate purification rituals or theories about bodily transformation. The pharmaceutical jars might represent stages in creating medicines or elixirs. This theory gains support from art historians who compare Voynich illustrations to other manuscripts from 14th and 15th century northern Italy. The style matches. The compositional choices match. Even specific details like how roots are drawn or how stems curve show similarities to herbals created in Lombardy in the 1430s, which aligns perfectly with radiocarbon dating. If this theory is correct, the manuscript might have functioned as a mnemonic system, not meant to be read by outsiders, but serving as visual triggers for people already trained in the knowledge. The plants would jog memory, unlock oral teachings passed from master to apprentice. The images weren't complete instructions, but reminders of information learned another way. This would explain why it's so hard to decode. We're trying to read something that was never meant to be read independently. We're missing the oral tradition that gave these images meaning. Another angle suggests it's a medical manuscript focused on women's health. In the 1940s, a cancer researcher named Lionel Strong claimed he'd partially decoded the manuscript and found it dealt with effects of plants on the body, especially diseases of women. He supposedly translated 2 pages, finding passages about childbirth and female anatomy. But he never explained his decryption method, claiming wartime security prevented him from sharing details. After his death, analysis of his notes revealed he'd been erasing characters when they didn't produce English words. When his method was tested on other sections, it produced gibberish. But the women's health theory didn't die with Strong. In 2017, a historical researcher named Nicholas Gibbs claimed the manuscript was written in abbreviated Latin, essentially medieval medical shorthand. He published his work in a major literary journal and got widespread press coverage. For a moment, it seemed the mystery might be solved. Then, experts examined his claims more carefully. He'd only translated 2 lines, and they didn't read as proper Latin. There was no consistent grammar, no verified matches to known medical abbreviation systems. He was cherry-picking patterns and seeing what he wanted to see. The scholarly consensus was harsh but fair. Wishful thinking, not rigorous analysis. But the idea that this might be a medical text, particularly one focused on women's health and gynecology, remains plausible. The bathing women, the pharmaceutical jars, the plant imagery, all fit that interpretation. If it is medical, it would explain the need for secrecy. Medical knowledge was valuable, sometimes dangerous. Keeping it in code or a restricted script would make sense. So what do we actually know for certain about the Voynich Manuscript? After 600 years of speculation and analysis, what can we say with confidence? We know it's not a modern hoax. Radiocarbon dating proves the vellum is genuinely from the early 15th century. Wilfred Voynich didn't create it. Neither did any other modern owner. We know it wasn't written by Roger Bacon. He died too early, over 100 years before the parchment was created. We know the text isn't random. It follows statistical patterns consistent with natural language. It has structure that matches how humans use words to communicate. We know it was created by multiple people. At least 5 different scribes worked on it, sometimes switching hands within a single page. This suggests a community project, not an individual endeavor. We know it's old. 600 years old, created sometime between 1390 and 1480, most likely in the early 1400s. We know it required significant resources. Vellum was expensive. Ink was expensive. Creating over 200 pages of carefully illustrated text represented a substantial investment of time and materials. We know it has 6 distinct sections with different themes: botanical, astronomical, biological, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipe sections, each with its own imagery and apparently its own vocabulary. And we know that no one has successfully decoded it. Not convincingly. Not in a way other researchers can verify and replicate. Those are the certainties. Everything else is speculation. Is it meaningful? Probably. Is it intentionally encrypted? Possibly. Is it written in a real language we haven't identified? Maybe. Could it be a constructed language invented for this specific purpose? That's plausible too. The manuscript remains in the most literal need for sense. Unreadable. We can see it. We can analyze it. We can theorize about it, but we can't read it. And maybe that's significant in itself. Maybe the manuscript is teaching us something about the limits of knowledge, about what we can and cannot access across the centuries. Let me end with a reflection, because this manuscript deserves more than just a list of failed theories and unanswered questions. There's something haunting about a book no one can read, about knowledge that exists but can't be accessed, about meaning trapped on pages, present but unreachable. The Voynich Manuscript might be the most complete example we have of lost knowledge. Not knowledge that was destroyed or suppressed, but knowledge that simply became inaccessible. The information is still there. The pages exist. The words are visible. But the key to understanding them is gone. This happens more often than we like to admit. Oral traditions die with their last speakers. Craft knowledge disappears when no one learns the technique. Languages go extinct, taking with them ways of thinking and understanding that can never be reconstructed. The manuscript might represent all of that. A tradition that died. A community that dispersed. Knowledge that was meant to be passed orally, with the book serving only as a reminder, a trigger for memory. When the oral tradition ended, when the last person who understood the system died, the book became gibberish. Or maybe it was always meant to be secret. Maybe it was created specifically to be incomprehensible to outsiders. A way of preserving knowledge while making sure only the right people, people with the right training, could access it. If that's true, it worked. 600 years later, we're still locked out. There's a possibility we don't like to consider. Maybe we'll never decode it. Maybe the key is genuinely lost. Maybe future generations will have the same high-resolution scans, the same analytical tools, and they'll fail, just like we're failing. Knowledge without a key is just data. Information without context is noise. The manuscript might be both. Meaningful to someone once, meaningless to everyone now. But perhaps there's value in that. Perhaps the mystery itself matters. Perhaps having something we can't explain, can't decode, can't fully understand, reminds us of how much we don't know, how much of history is missing, how much knowledge has been lost. The manuscript sits at Yale now, preserved, photographed, available for anyone to study. It will outlast all of us. It's already outlasted 6 centuries of scholars and cryptographers and obsessed individuals who thought they'd be the one to finally crack it. It waits, patient, silent, keeping its secrets. Maybe someone reading this will be the one who finally understands it. Maybe the breakthrough is just around the corner, one insight away, one connection away from making sense. Or maybe the manuscript will remain forever as it is now, visible but incomprehensible, present but inaccessible. A reminder that some mysteries might not have solutions, at least not solutions we can reach with the knowledge and tools available to us. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to solve every mystery. Maybe some things are allowed to remain unknown. The medieval book no one can read after 600 years, still waiting, still silent, still keeping whatever secrets it holds, locked away behind an alphabet no one remembers and a language no one speaks. If knowledge can survive, can meaning die? The Voynich Manuscript suggests the answer is yes. That meaning can be lost even when the physical record remains. That we can hold information in our hands and be completely unable to access it. That's unsettling. But it's also profound. It changes how we think about preservation, about what it means to save knowledge for the future. It's not enough to preserve the physical object. You need to preserve the key, the context, the living tradition that gives the object meaning. The manuscript is a warning in that sense, a reminder of how fragile understanding really is, how easily the key can be lost, how quickly the meaningful can become meaningless, but it's also beautiful in its mystery. A testament to human creativity and the enduring power of the unknown. 600 years and we still care about this book. 600 years and we're still trying to understand it. Maybe that persistence, that refusal to give up even when the puzzle seems unsolvable, maybe that's what really matters. Not whether we find the answer, but that we keep asking the question. The manuscript waits. And we wait with it, hoping, wondering, searching for the key that might never come.